Welcome back to our channel. In our last video, we discussed the basic concepts of class. We learned how to define a class. We learned what is an attribute. We learned what is a method, right? Today, we will discuss what is a class inheritance or what is inheritance of class. Okay. So by definition, inheritance is a fundamental concept in object-oriented programming, and it allows us to define a new class, which we might call as a child class or a subclass, that inherits the attributes and methods of an existing parent class. Let's break down the concept. So ideally or usually, when we define a class, we define it exclusively, right? So there is one class, there is another class, maybe there is a class car, there is a car, or sorry, there is a class, let's say Toyota, there is a class something else, Tata. Now just imagine, maybe the attributes or the methods, in general the properties that the car class has is common for the properties in the in the in the Tata class or in the Fortuner class, in the Toyota class. Okay, so whenever we are creating a new class, ideally we are repeating or we are replicating the properties of the car class, and that's not necessary. What we can do is we can create a bridge between the old class, let's say the car class, and the new class, the Tata class. Okay, we make sure that the properties of the car class should be transmitted or inherited to the Tata class. Hmm? But that doesn't necessarily mean that the Tata class will not have any new attributes or method. It will have, for sure. It might have, I mean, but what we make sure is Tata class will have the properties that the car class has. Okay, that's why the car class or the old class is called a parent class and the new class is called a child class. So we created a pseudo example. It's not an ideal Python code. It's like we define a parent class, we define some attributes there, we define a method, right? And then we define a child class. The child class actually inherits the parent class, okay? And then we define a new attribute for the child class here, we define a new method, but that all this child class also ensures that if you call the parent class method, let's say, then you can call it successfully because the child class is an inheritance of the parent class. Okay, let's say how it actually works. So initially we define a class soccer, right? It has attribute like name, age, position. It has also a method which is called details. What details do? This details actually prints some details of the player, like the name of the player, the age of the player, and the position of the player. This is our parent class or the super class. Now we will create an inheritance of this, right? So here we are defining another class, which is the player class. So this player class inherits the soccer class. That means the player class inherits the properties of the soccer class. All right. So initially we are again defining the attributes, and we are defining the attributes that the soccer class also has, right? So name, age, and position. In addition to that, we are also defining a new attribute, that is goals. And then the player class has its own method, which is like records, right? And then it is doing something like it's printing a statement that the player scored this many goals in the last tournament. All right. And then we are creating an object, my player, right? And let's see, if we first call the records method, which is there in the player class, and we see the player scored 10 goals in the last tournament. Cool, there is no problem. In this case, now if we call the details method, as there is no details method in the player class, we might think that we will get an error or we will encounter an error. Why? Because we haven't defined any details method in the player class, right? But when we run this, we see a result, right? And we see the name of the player is this, age of the player is this, the position of the player is striker. This is exactly what the soccer class has. So that means when we are inheriting the soccer class in the player class, we are actually inheriting all the properties. That means we are inheriting the attributes and we are inheriting the methods. So we don't need to define a method called details explicitly in the player class. This is good. This is cool, right? But still, it is suboptimal. There is a problem. What is the problem? In the player class, again, we had to define all the attributes, including the attributes present in the soccer class, right? Now, just imagine the soccer class has a higher number of attributes, maybe 10, 15, 20, something, right? Then every time we create a child class, we have to explicitly mention all the attributes. And that's a suboptimal, that's problematic, right? So we have to figure out a way so that we don't need to redefine the attributes that the old class already has. And how do we do that? So one possible option is, after mentioning or after providing the constructor for the new class, we explicitly call the constructor of the soccer class. So this is one possible option. And the moment we do this, we don't need to redefine the attributes. Okay, we don't need to redefine the attributes. We just have to define the attributes that the new class has by its own, right? Which is not common, let's say, right? And when we do that, we can still get some results. It's This is okay. This is cool. But again, this is a suboptimal. It's obviously better than the previous case, but it is not the best one. It's not the ideal one, right? Why not? Because every time you create a new class, a child class, you have to mention the constructor of the previous class or the parent class explicitly. And this is not a good solution if we go for a hierarchical inheritance method. In the sense, you I have a parent class, then we create a child class, next you create another class which is the child of the second class, let's say. So here we have this soccer class, and then I create a child called new player, and then you create a child of new player which is club, and so on and so forth, right? In this case, this method is not a good solution. Okay, it doesn't work. So what we can do, we have to do something which is not explicit, which is automatic, which extracts or which calls the constructor of the parent class automatically. How do we do that? Then we have a very beautiful built-in function in Python that is called super. Super ensures that we get the constructor of the parent class automatically. Okay, we don't need to explicitly mention the class or the explicitly mention the parent class while calling the constructor of the parent class. Not right. We have to always mention the parent class in the parenthesis, because this is how we are actually telling, okay, look, this is the class I'm going to inherit. So this is important. But by inheritance, we mean that we are actually getting access to all the properties of the parent class, right? So in the previous case, we had to explicitly mention, and that's why we mentioned the self here as well. We are calling the constructor of the parent class explicitly, but instead of doing that, the built-in function super ensures that the constructors are called automatically. Okay, and that's a way smarter approach in handling this situation. Clear? And when we do that, we don't need to call it again. We can just simply mention the attributes that the parent class has, which is here name, age, and position. Rest is same. And then if we run it, we simply see name of the player is this, age of the player is this, and the position of the player is this. Clear? So this is how we can create an inheritance of a class. So in this video, what we have learned, we discussed class inheritance. We understood what is an inheritance. We understood what is a parent class, what is a child class. We learned to define a new class which is an inheritance, or which inherits the properties of a parent class. we faced some challenges. We saw how to escape from the problem of redefining attributes multiple times. We 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 learned how to use the super built-in function here to avoid avoid mentioning the classes explicitly. Okay, clear? So I hope you like this video. If you find this video helpful, then please like, share and subscribe, hit the bell icon. Thank you so much.